Hey, what's up? I've loved hearing everyone's plosives on this microphone. It's a good plosive joke for you. So I'm gonna be honest. I wasn't, and when I pitched this talk, I wasn't entirely expecting it to get accepted because I really just wanted to rant for 15 minutes about this stupid thing I did. So a bit of background. Yeah, I'm not in games professionally. I work on rockets. I have the shirt and everything to prove it. Um, And when I started on that, I had this kind of starry-eyed idea that I'd be doing all this, game dev in my spare time and all that. But it turns out you don't have a lot of spare time when you're making rockets. Um, so in the holiday break of 2016, I played through some indie games that I had missed out on over the years, and I was like, indie games are usually pretty small, self-contained things, right? So one every day for an entire year. That sounds pretty easy. Lesson number 0, it's not easy. It's not. Every time I talk to someone about this, they say, oh, you must have got sick of that at some point. And the answer is yes, and the number is 283. That is the point where I got sick of it. But you can't give up at 283. So this talk is kind of, I make the joke of the secondary title of sample sizes matter, because it's interesting to look at so many games and so many that have similar little things that they could do better, and they seem like pretty reasonable little things, and maybe all of you are like, yeah, that's really obvious, but when you play 10 or 20 games, it feels different than when you see these things coming up again and again in 365. I mean, anything less than a couple of hundred in your p-values are going to be way off. So I want to put a gigantic grain of salt with this entire talk, which is that nothing that I can say in this talk is going to make your game great, and nothing that I can say in this talk is going to make your game good, but I hope that at least one thing I say in this talk will help make your game better. First thing I want to talk about is, playing 300 games. You don't remember all of them, so a real easy way to make people remember your games, make them weird, just really weird. So I've got 2 examples here. The first one is Fighter Gods, which is the fighting game community. There's a term called a kusogi, which is the Japanese term for shit game. And it's not a great game. It's clunky and awkward, but every character is a deity. So you're looking at Jesus using his super move against Buddha. So yeah, it's memorable. It's memorable. It's not great, but it's memorable. But I really like Dinner Party as an example of this, because Dinner Party is one of the most basic games I played in the entire time. Every character at this table is a letter on the keyboard, and when they light up, you press that letter. That's it. It's one of the most basic games. It is like the 3rd game you learn when you're learning how to program. But the theming, the idea that you're throwing a dinner party with a bunch of puppets and pretending that you're actually throwing a dinner party and trying to convince someone that you're actually throwing a dinner party, it's it's such a weirdly specific thing that it stands out in my memory. And an additional thing, if you want to make your game stand out to people, and I don't know how you would do this, but I was really sick when I played that one, and I had a fever dream about that guy on the right. And I swear to God, if you can get your players to have a fever dream about your game, they will never forget it. So moving onward from that, one thing I found a lot is with games that take inspiration from other games, inspiration is a 4-letter word. I always found, and I use Dark Souls as the example because everyone wants to make a Dark Souls game. But then nowadays, I've also noticed everyone wants to make Overcooked, so I don't know which one you need the swear jar for in your office. But there's this weird idea that if you pluck little mechanics from a game that you like, you'll make a game like that. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, mechanics build up to a whole, and if you're not focusing on the whole thing you want to build, then plugging these little mechanics isn't going to bring you back towards that. And it's an interesting thing to analyze, because if you take two games that are actually reasonably different, you can find all these mechanics that they share and say, hey, yeah, if I take all these mechanics from Dark Souls, I make Castlevania, because they're the exact same game, if you think about it, but but they're not, but they are. And so the entire thing is, if you're not thinking about your game as a whole and how your mechanics achieve that, stop taking Dark Souls mechanics and putting them in. So one thing I had a lot of trouble with is that I'm not a writer, and so words are hard. And so this is a kind of a weird one, but like, give people the language to talk about your game, because these are two really nice kind of arty games that I have no idea how to tell people about, because the description of the one on the right is, on their description page, is it's like snow but made of words. And that's great. That's great, but I don't know how to tell someone to play this game. The best I can come up with is it's like if you made an interactive fiction out of poetry instead of a story. And I had the same issue with this game Islands, which is kind of like an art exhibition, I guess. But it's this big problem because, I mean, if you want people to share your games, if you want people to talk about your games, and they don't have the language to communicate that, it's this incredibly small issue that just stops any conversation, and it sucks. Okay. This next one is kind of just a sore spot for me personally, but can you raise your hand if you're not a programmer? Okay. Now keep your hand up if you still do programming sometimes because you want to make little things. Cool. And I assume you like Google a lot, right? Please, after you Google a tutorial, can you like change it a little bit? Just a little bit. It is the programming equivalent of using default assets. I felt like this should be obvious, but again, I played so many games where in the first 30 seconds I was like, oh, you're using the default Unity first-person controller. So like, a little challenge to you, if you're in this position, is go home and fix the glitch in the standard Unity controller, where if you press jump in the air, you jump as soon as you land. Fix that glitch so I don't find it in 30 seconds of playing your game. Again, this is just a sore spot for me. So, trying to find 365 indie games, you look at a lot of thumbnails, and you scroll past a lot of thumbnails. And thumbnails are a skill. They're a skill, and I feel like too many people think that making a great logo is the same as making a great thumbnail, and that's not always necessarily true. The ability to catch someone's eye is incredibly important, and I like this concept that a thumbnail should pose a question that your game page answers. And that question can be a lot of stuff. It can be, little hints of things to come in the actual game. So I've got 4 different examples which tell you 4 different things. Wunderdokter, which is I kind of explained it as a cross between Papers, Please and Trauma Center. It's got a really lovely papercraft art style, and that is immediately communicated in the logo, which also uses that style. So it's an interesting style. You click through, you see what they're doing with it. Eat Me, which is actually a text adventure game, but hey, remember that first thing I said about being weird? That's a really weird thing, and it makes me want to click on it. Sarah's Missing, which aesthetic up front. The VHS kind of artifacts on the text. It's very obvious, and the name Sarah's missing. It kind of obviously plays into the found footage kind of style that they do there. And I included Terminal Town because, by all means, that's not a great it's not a great thumbnail, but it still communicates something about the game, and that's, I mean, this goes back to Jess's talk about fonts as well. Green phosphor on a black background, monospaced font with a blinking cursor tells you very obviously that this is a command shell, which, if you're a person like me, is awesome, and you're like, I'm gonna click on that game and figure out what the hell they're doing with a command shell. But my biggest thing and my final thing that I want to talk about is that despite everything that I can possibly say, the biggest thing that shines through in every single game is sincerity. If you listen to this talk and you say, oh, now I need to go off and make a really weird game. If that's not the game you want to make, that's going to be very obvious, like, very quickly. And all of my favorite games that I played throughout this entire thing were just people who, even smaller games, people who said, hey, I tried this and it didn't turn out the best, but it's something I'm proud of. And that shines through no matter how good or bad your game is. And that's all I've got. So thank you.